the handout there. We'll get to that shortly in just a minute. But we are starting the Gospel of John, and as you would presume, I'm sure most of you, it is we start then. It is like the most likely read book in the entire Bible. Anybody have any disagreements about that? I think as far as just your standard fare, it is promoted as kind of the first book, generally speaking, for new believers to delve into, right? And why is that?
It reveals who Jesus is. He reveals it to the unbeliever and
How to be saved.
verifies that.
Okay, all right. And Gary?
Or just salvation.
Salvation, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. They put these two things together. There's a way. I mean, John is markedly different in the way that he presents the gospel than the others, right? In fact, we call the others the synoptic gospels, right? And what does that word mean? Synoptic.
Kind of same or in
That's
order.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, right?
They essentially kind of follow the same path.
Yeah, well, certainly optic, we get sight, they see, right? And sin, as this YN, they agree. They agree with what they see, basically. They sort of see the same things, similar things. You can read through those three Gospels and you'll see multiple, the same story in some ways. You'll see it from a different vantage point, some different details about it, but basically they all have much the same content when you get down to it. However, John is just strikingly different. And so when you look at that, it is just peculiarly different, right? Sometimes you may have seen that people will kind of look at the Gospels, the four Gospels, and there's a chapter in Ezekiel chapter 1, and Ezekiel's full of strange visions, as you may be aware of. And one of them has these four flying creatures. They each have four faces on them, okay? One is the face of a man, the face of an ox, the face of a lion, and then the face of an eagle. Okay, and I'm not particularly going to test you which one is which, but which one do you think is John? Any guesses on that?
The eagle,
The eagle. Why is that?
because he's got a keen eye.
Well, he's the one that can see into the sun.
Oh.
They sort of look at, and that's what you experience. When you look at John, it's like sort of looking into the sun, something that the others don't quite grasp and include, because you just get to some detail about Christ that is unknown in the others, that you wouldn't be aware of, and that's really critical for our understanding of who Christ is. So that particular figure, by the way, that they map these different Gospels to is the tetramorph, if you wanted to know that. Four forms, okay? The lion, the ox, the man, and the eagle. And John being the eagle is what that represents. So you might see that in some icons or something like that of old church history. But as we get into the book of John, I'm just going to ask you, who is the author? Duh, right? But what do we know about John? I mean, because these books, other than the ones that are written like by Paul or Jude, some of those, the epistles and all, they don't come with the author written included in the actual content, okay? There's no publishing date, okay? There's no date when this was printed or anything like that. So this is all derived from, the like textual criticism and things like that we studied months ago. And when you look at it, the book of John, we sort of, it's been, obviously there's much tradition about this, but there's sort of pieces involved in looking through the text, and you see certain things that allude to, hey, this was certainly written by John. Some people debate about it, but I think there's such strong understanding that it is written by John himself, the disciple or the apostle, that it really is John. And when we look at it, what do you know about John? Anything comes to mind?
He was the disciple Jesus loved.
Very good. He was known as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Does that mean Jesus hated everybody else? No. We just kind of had a unique relationship to that. He maybe just felt a a way to ensure, a mentoring. He was going to upbring this person because he was going to do something special in that sense. He had a special assignment, you might say. Anything else? What else do we know about him?
He was the group of three, so to speak. That
Okay.
were around
Is that on your sheet there,
Jesus.
by the way? Put in.
He was already a leader.
Okay, John. He was already a leader? Who said that? Oh, well, I mean, he was supposedly the youngest of all the disciples that we know, I think, from what I sort of understand. So I don't think he was a strong leader. I think he had to go up, but he definitely, you might say, had a personality because he was known along, who his brother was?
James.
James. What did Jesus nickname them as?
The sons of
The Sons of Thunder, Sons of Boanerges or something. So they kind of had a strong personality in that regard.
Their mother was pretty forward.
What's that?
I said their mother was pretty forward too.
Yeah. Well, okay, good point. Who was their father?
Zebedee.
Zebedee. They were sons of Zebedee. And their mother was Salome. And she was one who, what's so well known about her?
She wanted to make sure they were running right and left hand.
Yeah, she grabbed two kids by the ears and brings them up to Jesus, right? When you come into your kingdom, can you have, these two guys sit on your right and left hand? So she sort of wanted some recognition. She was a strong woman. So, like you said, she may have had departed some leadership skills to the kids there. Interestingly enough, James would be the first apostle, first disciple to die. John would be the last.
And he wasn't martyred.
That is correct.
One of the
As far as we know, he was not
Yeah.
martyred, right?
He also, Jesus told him to take care of his mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're quite right. So,
He wrote other books.
what's that?
He wrote other books.
He did, you're right. We'll mention a couple of those in a moment, but Peter, James, and John, you include Peter here now, were part of the inner circle associated with Jesus, right? So you had, this time we had his general disciples around him, but he had this really a little bit tighter knit group that he would do certain teachings to. So the one was obviously the Transfiguration was the most part, and you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, that was another element where he just wanted those three around him. Now, the other thing was John would be called one of the pillars of the Jerusalem church in the book of Acts. So that's who John kind of was. And how about the date when this book was written?
Latter part of the first century.
Well,
Anywhere from 85 to 90.
yeah, some people go as far early as 65. We don't know. Somewhere between 65 and 95. Traditionally is in the 90s.
Yes.
But there's still debate about what's going on. And so again, there's no publishing date in there. Okay. Some of it is by some of the other patristic fathers, the church fathers, who may say, something about it that give us a clue when it might have been written. But there's no publishing date in the gospel itself. So it's not that that's critical, but I think that we just need to understand it was written in that first century, the latter part of the first century there. Within sometime between 65 and 95.
What was John's first profession or his other profession?
He was a fisherman. Yeah, he
I
was.
just want to make sure.
Sons of Zebedee, yeah, with James, and there was sort of in a connection with Peter was also part of that group there, so that they knew each other quite well.
But he was also, let's see, Polycarp and Clement. They probably knew him.
He discipled Polycarp.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So.
And so there is a connection from the actual New Testament over into some historical figures
there
later on in
definitely
the
is.
early
There
church.
definitely is. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, is there anything, maybe his history, or that points to why he was favored by Jesus?
As like being the disciple whom Jesus loved.
Yeah.
I didn't do research on it per se. I didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe he just wasn't. He was just so young and tender in that sense. Maybe he just brought him along, sort of under his wing in that way. I couldn't give you an answer for that. Yeah. All right. What's its provenance? Anybody know what that is? Provenance.
Provenance. Is that proving that was who it was written by who he says, or that it's I know Provenance and Art shows it was
Me.
by the artist that
Yeah,
it says
it's
it
from
was.
the origin of it,
Yeah,
right? Where did it
okay.
come from, essentially? You're looking at what's the source? And so provenance, in this case, where was it written is really what we're more
Patmos.
peculiarly interested. Say again?
Patmos.
Patmos, no.
No.
No, not to our best understanding. That was Revelation. Revelation for sure had to do with Patmos, because it says it right in there.
Okay.
Okay, but not in John. John, as far as we know, came from Ephesus, but because he basically and I don't know, couldn't tell you if it was before or after Patmos. Brent, I didn't do that kind of research on it as far as which book was written first.
That's where he was exiled to, though.
He was
Pat-
exiled to Patmos, yes. But then he eventually made his way to Ephesus, and that's the story is legendary. That's where he died, kind of. But there's not a whole lot of details on that. All right, so we look at finally the purpose of the book. Now, it's really nice when a book comes with an actual purpose statement written right into it. May not have the publishing date, but it is nice that there's a purpose written right into it. And what did I?
Yes.
Yep.
2031.
Okay, so did anybody bring a Bible?
I did.
Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
Okay, very good. So is that the whole verse for you?
I don't know.
It
but
says
I-
these things were written.
These things were written.
Yep.
Okay,
That
okay. So these things, what were the things?
everything, all the verses in front of that.
Yeah, the story. And in fact, you get, particularly, it's like when he, right immediately before he says this, it's the situation of doubting Thomas, okay? So it's one of those signs that to doubting Thomas, these things, all these things he's incorporating, including up to the final point of where he's demonstrating, he has been resurrected and alive, that these were written such that ultimately you may have, what does it say, Wendy? Eternal life.
Yeah, you have life in his name.
Life in his name. All right. So it's beautiful that we are given that, but by believing you may have life in his name. Who's the intended audience? Who's he writing it to?
The Jews.
Say again?
The Jews.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Well, he was one of the elders in the Jerusalem
He
church.
was Jewish.
Yeah.
That's particularly true. Yes.
They weren't accepting Jesus as the Messiah.
Yes. That is quite right. So it's very, he wanted to make sure. In fact, the way that it's worded, you really see it. He says that these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, meaning basically Messiah, right? The Son of God. So there is particularly an emphasis Jewish-wise to that. But also, you can see from the language that is within the text itself that it is ultimately for all people. And that's because you'll see a lot about the world in this book. He'll write about, God so loved the world and so forth, in language of that nature, which invites everyone, right? And so it really is, it's particular to the Jews in one sense, but it's ultimately for all people. I'm going to give you some factoids. You may find this interesting. Factoids, right? Little facts. John, so nice thing, this book, it really takes us into the being of God, right? We see, remember months ago we studied the Trinity, right? And what was the two Trinities that we looked at? Anybody remember? We considered
Ontological.
ontological
And the economic.
and the economic, right? The economic being sort of how it works out in history and reality in the world and so forth, and the universe and the creation. And the ontological was what it is in its nature, its reality to itself. So we're really exposed to both of those quite dramatically. As we go through the text, we'll get to those points and we'll highlight them. Okay. There are words, it's interesting, John never uses the word apostles, okay, to describe the disciples, because you get to Luke and they're often called the apostles. John never calls them, he always calls them disciples. It's sort of interesting. The word repent, how many times is it used? Never.
No.
It is never used in the book of John. It is never used in 1 John. It is never used in 2 John or 3 John. And Revelation is used more than any other book of the Bible. Interesting little tidbit there, right? Why doesn't John include repentance in his when he's presenting the gospel? We'll look at that later. But he does talk about belief. Belief is his big word. Okay, when you look all through this text, you're going to see believe as just kind of a key parameter that he's going to focus on. It's used 98 times. That's a lot of times for one book. Okay, there are no exorcisms. No demons are cast out of anybody. There's no there. When normally in the synoptics you will see Jesus prays and then he names the 12 disciples. He goes through them. It's not done in John. He just says a few of them here and there, but he never, goes through the formality of naming the 12. They're just called the 12. That's all that they're called. There's no parables of Jesus. Instead, he uses some of the allegories or spiritualizing. When he says, like, I am the good shepherd, I am the door. He never calls John the Baptist. He just calls him John. Interesting. He mainly focuses on Christ's Judean ministry, that is, at the time when he's in Judea, whereas the synoptics look more at his time in Galilee, the northern area. John focuses on when he is in the south. There's no great commission given in John. Okay, now there's the upper room discourse, and we'll look at that, but it's not as if the formalization of now go forth and blah, blah. Okay, there's no Christian baptism. You see John baptizing. It's not the same as what we call them baptism in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, that sort of thing. There's no implementation of the Lord's Supper. Isn't that weird? Kind of strange. Only John's Gospel declares Jesus as the Lamb of God. There is, of course, no earthly genealogy. Now, what other books have the genealogy of Jesus?
Matthew.
Matthew and Luke. How far does Luke, how Matthew go to?
Matthew goes to Abraham.
Yes. How about Luke?
To Adam.
Adam. He calls Adam the son of God, okay? I mean, in the sense that he was made by God. But, and Mark does not have a genealogy. Some people look at Mark as he was writing to sort of servants, you might say, slaves. Slaves don't have genealogy, so there's no concern about that. So, but the point is, when we look at John, he does not include an earthly genealogy either. But what does he take us back to?
Creation.
Eternity, right?
Eternity, before
So it's
creation.
really the utmost in sort of genealogy. So there's no mention of the word. By the way, there's no baptism. Do not see the baptisms of Jesus in a sense personally. You hear it sort of third hand. So you hear John the Baptist talking about Jesus' baptism. You're not brought to the scene, okay, the way the others do. There's no testing or temptation of Christ at all. There's no mention of the word church, although Matthew was the only other gospel that actually does it. There are what they call seven signs in the Gospel of John, and there's 7 I am statements. Now there's actually more, but these are recognized as the ones that are just the traditional I ams and the traditional signs. Okay, so we'll go over those as we go through them. Lots of times you may see something called a word cloud when you look at some sort of a document. Anybody ever heard of that? A word cloud is you look at, we talked about it a few minutes ago a little bit in terms of the senses. Word cloud shows you the frequency of a word mentioned. So they may have like it's all sort of in a cloud shape and I'll have whatever comes up. So we talked about belief would be the big one in essence, and then you may have like sun, and then, lamb kind of a thing. So the ones that are most often are presented as the biggest, and they're sort of grouped together in some big cloud and all that. So it's interesting, but as I said, the words of significance that are often used that you'll associate with John are like life. You see a lot of that. Love, certainly. Light, love, and light. The 3 L's come often in the book of John. You will see the word believe, as we mentioned a lot. I am. Anybody know of other expressions or words that seem to be crop up a lot in the book of John? But when he often talks about is the hour. My hour has not yet come. He'll sort of use that language a lot. So anyway, those are just some various words of significance. Now let's break out the book real quick. I did spell that out there. Okay. So in the breakout, there's various ways that people do it. And so they'll have, for instance, the very first portion, majority portion, say half of chapter 1, is devoted to what they call the prologue, okay, which means the beginning statements, the beginning words. So the prologue, and goes from 1 to 1:18. Okay, this begins with what words? In the beginning, right? So and basically ends down to the point where I can't remember the exact. It is line 18. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, and that's, you're looking for what it ends with?
Yeah.
No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known.
Okay, all right. At that point, then it starts into John the Baptist, issues with him. So the second portion is kind of a big group, and we oftentimes call that the Book of Signs. Sounds like some sort of mysterious occultic thing, but it's not. It's basically this is a period in which you get the quote unquote the 7 signs of Jesus and particular miracles that he's doing, certain stories, a lot of discourses, conversations that he has. And that's basically from 119 all the way to 1250, or the end of the chapter, end of chapter 12. And then we get to, some people call it by different names, farewell instructions, or disciple prep, you might say, disciple prep. And that is essentially the upper room discourse period, right? It's chapter 13 through chapter 17. All right. And then the passion and resurrection are conveniently chapters 18 and 19. And then finally, the epilogue, the ending of it, is chapter 21. So it kind of lends itself to a nice way of style of breaking out.
Where?
Isn't it 18
Chapter
to
20.
20?
Say that again? Oh, 20. Yeah, you're right. What happened to chapter 20?
That's what it says on your paper. Well, it says 10.
10, but
I'm assuming it's 20.
Chapter, it says 20. Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. I think that's right. Passion and resurrection. Okay. And the post-appearing, yeah.
Yeah, the 20 is the resurrection.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Just testing, y'all. You passed very well. Okay, so now, how are we to study this book? And what I want to do is, oftentimes you go through a study like this, it could be that, we finally end chapter 1, we get into chapter 2 or chapter 3, and it's like, does anybody remember what we covered in chapter 1? No. So what I wanted to do was just I'm not looking for us to memorize the book by any means, but I would like to know, to get us to really just have a real good understanding of the book itself. What's going on when. So it's sort of like, you're in a national park and you're on a trail and you can go and see these beautiful vistas and mountain scenes and meadows, and there's trouble spots, rough spots and things like that, so you can go through and the territory, the lay of the land. You don't know the rock and pebble, certainly not, but you know what's coming up next. You know how it all sort of fits the feel of the trail, or maybe walking through a house and or some sort of a huge place, and you know what's going to come up in this room and what room you just left and the rooms before. So I want us to just basically have that kind of an understanding of familiarity with John, such that then, I think it's somewhat natural to become, you can memorize things a bit easier in that sense, because you'll have gone over some of these patches of land, so to speak, so much that they're just going to kind of come in your mind because you passed over the terrain so many times.
So you're our tour guide.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't think of it like that, but I guess that'd be a good way to look at it. So, I want us to kind of get to know the essential content of each of the chapters, the narratives, what's some of the critical text, some of the phrases that were used, perhaps, statements, and how each narrative adds ultimately to the redemptive historical storyline. The methodology is there's 21 chapters in the book, as you know, and what I'd like you to do is just kind of like a couple times each week, maybe just go through and outline the book. It doesn't take but maybe 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and just pull from your memory what you can think of, and then just breeze through the book itself and just, I forgot this, and just kind of add to it. So just do it 2 or 3 times a week. Hopefully during the whole course, I don't know, but you maybe just become so familiar with you that you really learn it and memorize a lot of at least what I'm after here. So, and that way, I'm going to pass up the form sheets. You've got them there, and I've got this other stack here for extra use. I'm going to hand out to you before you go. And it's like I just wanted to take a few of them and practice with that. I'll send you the handout, when I send out the email along those lines, so you can practice it at home, because that's 100 sheets there. Okay. So, but I want you to do is just go through it, do what you can. Check your work against the gospel itself. Add missing items. Add detail that you want. Make corrections and so forth. And I think this way you become very familiar with it, and it will seem much more natural to you. You're not going to forget what we just covered and so forth, and you'll know what's coming up next as well. So in class, we'll periodically, I think what we'll do is in the class itself here, I'll ask you some questions, and I hope to just your answers just rattle off, and I don't even know. I'll just be amazed at what you all do. So this is my methodology. I hope it's not going to crash and burn. But I think just doing it myself a few times just made me kind of focus on it, and really did help me to kind of understand some things.
What's our timeline to get through the book?
That's a good question.
For the class?
A year. I would say a year, probably. I wouldn't expect anything less than a year. There's so much content in there. So I would, yeah. It's not going to be a short study by any means. All right. Now there'll be some challenges, like for instance, the upper room discourse is probably going to be much challenging, because it sort of seems to waver back and forth. Some of the same things are repeated, like in chapter 13, he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another." That's in 13. In John 14, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." John chapter 15, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." So there's a lot of kind of repetition. It's not as distinctive necessarily, but I think he's reiterating, saying again in multiple ways what he wants them to learn. So we'll have, go through some challenges along that. So what I'd like to do for the rest of this time period is go ahead, let's go through and just take what you have there on your sheet, and let's think about what we know is in the chapters, okay? So the significant events or people encounters and so forth like that. So I'm just going to go through them. You go ahead and we'll go ahead and do it as a class together today, just to get the basic elements of what I'm after. Okay, when we think of chapter 1, for instance, what would you say would be, what are the things that you remember in your mind right now? No cheating there, Brandon. I just want to do this from memory real quick. Just think about what comes into mind in chapter 1.
I am the Word. The Word was with God.
Okay.
I mean, Jesus.
In the beginning.
All right.
Creator.
So basically, we have the deity of Christ, you might say, declared, right? And if you want to put in, parentheses, prologue or something like that, we'll go over some of the other things, more detail, and flesh this in a little bit more if we get the time here today. What about chapter 2? Anything you remember about chapter 2?
John, but not the Baptist. You said he doesn't ever call him John the Baptist.
Yes. So what are you saying about it?
You're introduced to John the Baptist. Or John introduces Jesus, right? I am the forerunner.
Okay.
Right.
And what chapter is that?
2.
No, chapter
One,
1.
one statement.
It's chapter 1.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
never mind.
Okay, but you can add that
Can we
if you
cheat with
want.
the headings?
No,
Can we
you
look at
can't
the
look.
headings? The passages
Well,
there?
no, you can't even look at the headings right now. I just wanted to go from memory real quick.
The
Just
wedding.
We're gonna get, okay, the wedding at Cana. And you might, and there's miracle number, sign number 1, okay, which would be
The
water to
blind
wine.
man. Is that the blind man? The man that was born blind? No. Huh?
We're not there yet.
Okay.
This is a good test. See, now you're going to appreciate it. I mean, you have to think about it first, then you're going to appreciate it. Anything else in chapter 2, just real majorly, that event happened?
You said the wedding, but what was the other thing? You said it was a miracle.
Okay, that was.
Oh, the miracle, okay.
Water into wine. Okay. For us, it might be wine into water. If you're a Baptist, so. Okay. Now, what about chapter 3? And we'll get to more in chapter 2 as we just go on major things. Chapter 3. What do you remember about chapter 3? An event, a conversation, or whatever. Nicodemus, right? So the discourse with Nicodemus, you might say something of that nature. Very good. Chapter 4.
The woman at the well?
Woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, that's right. And was there any miracles in chapter 3? I mean, just between the Nicodemus thing and the Samaritan woman? Did he exercise any miracle? No, nothing. I mean, he knew a word of knowledge, you might say, obviously knew everything about her, but it didn't present a miracle, interestingly enough. Because what happened there was you have a multitude eventually of a number of Samaritans come to know the Lord, but it didn't require a miracle, did it? Okay. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Brent!
I don't know how to spell. I got to be able to spell it.
Chapter 5. Okay. What happens? Jesus is going to have a big encounter here, and he heals. He has a healing. It's the invalid. Remember the guy with the angel, the waters? He waits for the angel to stir the waters. Okay, it was the invalid healing at the Bethesda pool, if you want to call it that. Invalid healing.
How's that not a miracle?
That is a
It's one of
miracle.
the signs. It is a sign.
There's only 7 of them in this Gospel.
Well,
of
we're
John.
calling, there's the 7 sort of official signs,
Yeah.
is what they're called. 7. So this would be this is actually number 2. No, this, it could be number 3. So I have to think about it. This is why I'm probing my own memory in here, okay? The invalid healing, which is certainly one of the signs. And then he has, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, he has that big conversation about with the Pharisees of the Jews about himself, his authority, you might say. Okay, think about chapter 6. Chapter 6.
Feed the 5,000.
Yes, indeed. Feeding the 5,000. Do you think that's a sign? It is absolutely.
Walking on the water.
Okay, so that, in fact, that actually comes next. I don't know if you remember the story, but remember when he feeds the 5,000? Okay, he's up in Galilee at this time, and he goes and then he sends them sort of away, but they haven't left really. So he sends the disciples or whatever across the way, and then he goes and makes it. He's going to walk across the water, but to join the disciples. And so this is another sign. So he walks across the water. That is another sign.
Jesus, okay, I'm cheating, but
You are
in
cheating.
number 4, he heals the official son. So that was the
That
one
is
you
the sign.
forgot.
Yeah.
Huh?
But so since my wife cheated here, if you want to go back to chapter 4, the conclusion of chapter 4, he heals an official son.
I wanted to get the number right for the 7, so that's number 2.
All right.
The official
Right.
sign.
So we don't know who this guy is, but he's the guy that says, please come down, my son is dying, so he heals him, basically. Okay, we talked about chapter 6, feeding of the 5,000. By the way, is there any other thing that comes out of that conversation?
The feeding of the 5,000.
Yeah.
He's
Bread of
Bread of
You
life.
got it. A bread of life discourse. Yes, indeed. Okay. It's all that
Well,
stuff.
didn't he say that to the woman at the well too? I am the living
No,
water
that
and the
was
bread of,
thirst.
oh, the thirst, okay.
Right, exactly.
Living
John
water.
himself. Okay. So you want to include in chapter 6 the bread of life discourse.
And then he walks on the water in chapter 5,
He does
chapter
that.
6, bread.
He first feeds the 5,000. He sends the disciples off, and then he's going to walk on the water to get to
Number
them.
6, right? Chapter 6.
That's chapter 6. Yes. And
And so that would be number 5 for the signs, right? Because that would be considered a
let's see.
miracle.
As far as the signs, we got the wedding at Cana. We've got the healing of the official son as number 2. We've got the invalid healing as
That's
number
number 3.
3. Feeding the 5,000 number 4. Walks on the sea is number 5. Okay. Okay. Then we have in chapter 7.
Oh.
Anybody remember what's going on in chapter 7?
It's all blurred to me at this point.
Does he feed the
It's
4,000?
kind of, well, it does really get kind of blurry. Say
Does he
again?
feed the 4,000 and 7?
No, he never includes the feeding the 4.
Oh.
So the point about what happens is between 7, 8, 9, and 10, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all associated with the Feast of Tabernacles. He's at this one feast, and all these things sort of take place. So it gets a little complicated here. We have to sort things out. But as we look at this, this is where he talks about being, living water, you might say. There's a lot of stuff going on, but just call it Feast of Tabernacles, part 1. Jesus' authority is challenged, and they intend to arrest him, but they fail to arrest him. I don't know if you remember, but it's like the Pharisees are like, why didn't you bring this guy back? Because nobody ever spoke like this before, kind of a thing. And so it was the beginning of this kind of, a lot of conversations about Jesus.
What did you say about his authority, testing his
It was
authority?
quite a lot.
Questioning his
question, yeah.
Okay,
Challenge, you might say.
Is that where they ask him, how do you do this? Whose authority? And
Yes.
he turns it around and says,
By what authority? Well, I think
Well, he
you're thinking
says-
of Matthew. You might be thinking of Matthew, where he says, "Okay," but they say, "By what
By John.
authority?" And then he basically, what does he do? He
Yeah,
challenges
authority
them.
given
You tell me by
Is John
John's
from heaven or
baptism.
not? Yeah,
Was it
that's not it.
from heaven? That's not it. That's in Matthew, I think. No. Okay. So it's a different setup here. Okay, and chapter 8. Anything? Remember anybody? Chapter 8.
The Feast of Tabernacles.
It's
Okay,
still
we're
the
still going on
feast.
the Feast of Tabernacles, that is for sure. But there's this interruption that happens that we had talked about during our look at the text of Scripture, the text, textual criticism. Remember that? And we have this thing called the pericope adulteri. Is the name?
Right.
You remember that, Gary?
it's right at the end of my tongue.
I knew you were going to remember that. What is pericope? I've gone through that several times.
A passage or?
Basically a passage. You basically cut something out. This is a section of passage, so you can call it a passage. But technically, it's called the pericope adulteri, Latin. Basically, it's a section on the adulteress. Okay.
Oh,
Do you
the
remember
woman
when
caught
she's
in
brought-
adultery?
The one caught in adultery is brought in front of Christ, and they say, what's the conundrum that they want to bring to Jesus? What's the quandary they want to trap him in?
They want to see if he'll abide by the law, which says stone her.
Stone her, okay? And if he says stone her, then they'd say,
It's like, this isn't a nice message at all.
yeah, exactly. Where's the grace? Where's the mercy? Right? You're supposed to be so merciful.
But if he says, be merciful, don't
Yeah.
stone her, it's like, you're not abiding by the law.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's, you don't support Moses. You're trying to overthrow Moses, right? So you got him in this situation.
But this whole passage is questionable as to whether it was truly in the
Exactly
text.
right. So when you look at it, and you can tell it's stuck in this place, and it's really the wrong place for but it's just, it's where it is, traditionally where it has stayed now, and it's not gonna move. But you will find it could be, and it could be put, really, probably might have been better in Luke or something like that, but it's in John, and you can tell, because you can go around it, and it just meshes, everything ties up. It's a lot cleaner without it in there, yeah.
But it kind of goes with the woman at the well, right?
Well, I mean, it wasn't, there's certainly,
Example.
I don't know if there's a connect, I don't think it was the same woman by any
I know,
means.
but-
But you're right, it has that sort of lean-to as far as what the type of person that is being,
Yeah, she was shunned by everybody else,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Jesus could have shunned her even more because the person she was living with wasn't her husband. So
right.
but
All right, so the pericope adulteri, if you want to write down the Latin, or the adulterous situation there. And so we're continuing on the Feast of Tabernacles, and this is also a big chapter for more drama, more conversation drama. And this is where you will find he has I'll just tell you, the Abrahamic legitimacy argument, okay? I'm just going to put it down, the Abrahamic legitimacy. That's the way I call it. Abrahamic legitimacy. And what am I talking about there? This is when the Jews, they go back and say, we have Abraham as our father, we are basically the saved, we are the chosen, essentially is what they're saying. And Jesus basically gets in their face and said, if you're Abraham's kid, you would not be trying to kill me right now, right? So it's this big legitimacy argument about who is Abraham's kids, essentially. That whether or not the Jewish people can legitimacy, bloodline, there's no question they could, link their lineage back to Abraham. But does that mean that does Jesus consider them children of Abraham the way that they're behaving, you might say? Okay? All right, how about chapter 9?
we're still on the Feast of Tabernacles.
Still in the Feast of Tabernacles, actually, yeah. There's a big healing in this one here.
Healing of the man born blind.
The man born blind healing, that's right, the man born blind. And it's funny because there's not a whole lot of, Jesus has a certain amount of time in this passage, but most of the verbiage is dealing with the Jews and how do we explain this guy, and why is you get his mother, get his parents in here, and so there's this big argument. He causes a ruckus is what it does, and Jesus eventually finds the guy again, but there's a lot of it's just dealing with the aftermath of the healing. It's kind of an interesting chapter in that way. And then
So what was like the Feast of Tabernacles, the question or the
well, it's just associated with the same time period.
Okay,
It's not,
okay.
I think what you find is that it's still, they're not seeing that they're blind. That's the way to put it.
Okay.
Because the chapter ends with, after he has healed this guy who had been born blind, remember the disciples were like, who sinned? Him or his parents to cause this disaster, So Jesus says neither, But essentially at the very end of the chapter, the Pharisees basically, say, are we blind then too? And Jesus says yes, because you won't, I forget the exact language there, but you won't acknowledge your sin or whatever because you say that you're not blind, you are blind. And then chapter, what are we on, 10 now? Okay, we got the final Feast of Tabernacle period here. Anybody remember anything about this chapter?
I am the vine.
No.
No, that's 15. Okay, the Good Shepherd.
Yeah, Jeopardy.
Good Shepherd.
There.
Is it the first I am?
The sheep.
Yeah, I am. Basically start coming up. It's not that he didn't have others before, but they're most peculiar here because he talks about, I am the good shepherd, right? And he's pointing this out in contrast to like the Pharisees that they just had this encounter with in chapter 9. He's really making the stark contrast about, you guys are the bad shepherds, I am the good shepherd, is what he's getting to. He also talks about, I am the door, things of this nature. And he also is going to talk about his oneness with the Father. Okay, this is where it says, I and the Father are one. And you can believe me, that upsets a lot of the Jewish people there. Then in chapter 11, very significant, the last of the signs. What happens in chapter 11? Lazarus, right? And Lazarus dies, and he raises Lazarus from the dead, right? Talk about being a major event that was taken notice of. You can't deny that one too much, you know. And as a result of that, the Pharisees plot to kill Jesus, and afterwards even Lazarus. Let's get this guy down. Make sure he doesn't come back, you know. So this is where that market statement, and what is Christ? What is it? The big statement.
I am the resurrection and the
resurrection and the life. Okay. So he who believes in me, even though he dies, shall. I can't remember the last one. So what?
When he takes his time to go, when he heard that he had died, to make sure that
Yeah.
they know that there's nothing else. Like
I think he wasn't just asleep.
Yeah, exactly. Want to make sure he was dead, right? That nobody could come up with excuse.
Dead,
Oh,
dead.
you know, he was just swooning or whatever the language is. So he wanted because he just lingered. You know, he lagged. He made sure. And Martha was upset about that, right? Lord, if you had been here earlier, he would have died. But Jesus said, no, that's not the way it's going to be run. So we get to, we're almost halfway through this, actually. We get to chapter 12. Now, chapter 12 is kind of a number of different things sort of happen in this chapter, and it's going to be a reorienting of things. So now he's going to be looking more at heading into the crucifixion realm of things, okay? But so there's a turning, you might say, taking place. And we look at chapter 12. Anybody remember anything about chapter 12?
Triumphal entry?
The triumphal entry is definitely in this here, okay? And so he's going to ride the donkey in and so forth. Also before this, if you want to remember, Mary anoints Jesus' feet with her hair. Is done part of this.
perfume.
With the perfume.
Yeah, the ointment and perfume. If you call it, the Greeks seek Jesus. Okay, remember Philip wants to bring some Greek guys. They want to see Jesus. It's funny because Jesus, I mean, you look at it, it's like Jesus just sort of brushes them off. And it's like, Jesus, where's your come back? Don't you want them to hear the gospel? So anyway, it's just sort of, we'll get to that chapter eventually. But it's just sort of interesting the way that, they are treated in that sense. And this is where his discourse about being lifted up. So there's a lot of sort of fragmented pieces in this chapter, but you sort of string them together, you get the picture. In chapter 13, we're going to just go through a couple of these. Chapter 13 is pretty, you can add easily into here as part of the upper room discourse. What happens in the upper room discourse? What's the sort of the major thing?
Feet washing.
Feet washing. He washes the disciples' feet, right? He's going to leave that as an example for them. So are we supposed to practice foot washing? Some churches do. You don't want to wash them up. All right. So also Judas departs. Judas, of course, becomes possessed, you might say, I guess, by Satan.
Judas leaves in 13.
Mm-hmm. So basically his farewell address starts. And in 14, 15, 16, I'll just go through because a lot of it's preparation for the disciples that he's going away, and yet do not feel abandoned. I am sending someone else, right? Who's that someone else going to be? The Holy Spirit, obviously, right? So, but in chapter 14 comes that famous line where, remember, is it Philip who says to him, "Show us the way." And what does Jesus say?
Have you been with me so long that you don't know?
I am the way, the truth, and the life, right? So that's that famous line in there. Chapter 15, dearest.
Okay, that's I am the vine, you are the branches.
Right,
That's
same.
the way.
And more Holy Spirit. And chapter 16, any notable lines in there? Well, he does ask, the thing is, ask in my name, so it's really getting prayer, ask in my name, and he also says, you will all fall away, so he's declaring,
Is that when he says Peter will fall away, or is that in 17? That Peter will deny him?
Right.
Wait, what did you say first?
That he's going to say, you will all fall away. Now, I can't remember if Peter is adamant about it right in this chapter or not, but it might be.
What did you say for 16?
That's just where he says, ask in my name anything, and I'll give it to you. So it's the open invitation to prayer in his name. Okay? And chapter 17 is Christ's
High priestly
It's a
prayer.
high priestly prayer, exactly right. So this is where he goes before the Father, and he then prays on behalf of his disciples and all those who will believe as a result of their work and their effort, their labor, right? It's interesting that, what is it, does he ask them to pull them out of the world?
The opposite.
No, he doesn't, right? He wants them to live in the world, but protect them while they're in it, able to do the job ultimately. Yeah. Okay, chapter 18. We're out of the upper room discourse, and now we are.
Now, he doesn't do the transfiguration in John,
That is
does he?
correct.
Okay.
Transfiguration.
Chapter 18, what are we
Chapter
doing?
18. So here we get into the garden betrayal and arrest of Jesus. And then we get the trial, his trial at Annas and Caiaphas.
Is that still in 18?
18, yeah, it's all in 18. He shove them between the different people, between Annas and Caiaphas. And there's a relationship between Annas and Caiaphas. I don't have it at hand right now, but they were definitely...
Son-in-law or something?
Yeah, some sort of by marriage, some kind of thing. And then he's delivered to Pilate for execution.
That's 18?
18, yeah. And then in chapter 19, Jesus is delivered for crucifixion. He is buried in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and the body is anointed. Right? Remember that? By who does the anointing? Who's involved? Any names you remember?
Mary, it always is a Mary.
Nicodemus.
Nicodemus and
Yeah, he provided the space.
Joseph. Was it Nicodemus? Was it just Nicodemus and Joseph?
Yeah, I'm sure Joseph is there, but Nicodemus is certainly the most notable one.
We're still in 19?
19, yeah. All right, moving on to chapter 20. And here we have the resurrection occurring, right? And the post-resurrection appearances. So we go through several of these. So post-resurrection appearances. And the most notable one we've already mentioned earlier about doubting Thomas, right?
Does he get into Peter, the three affirmations of Peter, do you
Just
love
wait.
me? Oh, gotta wait?
Just wait.
Okay.
So, and he goes through basically, and this is obviously where you read earlier, I think, Wendy, about the purpose of the book is the last verse of this chapter here. And then we move to chapter 21, and we get into the epilogue, and this is on the beach, okay? The beach in Galilee, the shores of Galilee. Remember the disciples go there, Peter leads everyone there. And this is where, as you mentioned, that we have this discourse with Peter to feed Christ's sheep. For the 3 times, if you love me, so feed my sheep, kind of thing. And then we also have the destinies of Peter and John are kind of made known. Peter is going to be martyred, essentially, and John is going to live to...
Where does it says that in 21?
Of Peter and John?
Their destinies, are mentioned. Yeah. All right, and then obviously the last line: the whole world could contain, the acts of what Jesus did as far as the books, and make kind of a final statement about that. All right, so what you've done there, what I like to do, and I'm going to wrap up here, is take a few of these sheets here, and if you would, just kind of keep them with you. I'll send out ones you can print out later, but just go through just kind of what we did here and practice it through the week, over the coming weeks, and you're going to know this book really well. So actually, we'll kind of review a little bit each of the week about different things that we cover, so they'll be even more familiar to you. Because I really want you to just get into the actual material so that you become very comfortable with it.
You want to take notes and bring them back to answer your questions?
Absolutely, yeah, sure, yeah. So, I'm not going to say impromptu quizzes here or anything like that, but I think, because I've got a few more here, so I'll bring these next week, so we have some more. But, are there any kind of questions that we can?
I'm not done.
Say again?
We got 1 minute until service starts.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and close and we'll get going here. Lord our God, we thank you so much for this gospel. We pray that you